How's it going, and welcome to No Fun Allowed. And today I want to talk about the crazy Candlekeep week that I had. I ran all 17 modules over the course of a week and change, and of course I just want to talk about that experience. So players, don't watch this because I will be revealing spoilers, but DMs that just want that added insight, go ahead and stick around because I'm going to be covering the whole thing. So yes, I did run all 17 adventures in the span of a week. So a week before the book came out, I put out a video saying, hey, if you want to play in a one-shot ran by me, go ahead and join the Discord and go ahead and sign up for these games. And surprise, surprise, a decent amount of people showed up. In total, we had 37 people join in that Roll20 game. I don't believe all 37 played because I think some of them had to back out at the last moment or whatever. But I know for a fact we had at least 30 people between all those 17 different sessions. So we had a nice rotation of people in all of the games. For some other fun stats, we have 63 different PCs over the course of those 17 adventures. And they ranged anywhere between 3, 4, and 5 PCs in each and every one of the one-shots. Of these 63 PCs that ventured out in these amazing one-shots, we had 16 PC deaths. And we also had 3 TPKs, and we had one group that gave up to the enemy. They essentially surrendered. So, that was a fun time. So to get a time frame of running these adventures, I ran the very first session there, The Joy of Extradimensional Spaces, the day it came out. And then every day after that, I ran 2 different games. And I spread them out over a decent amount of time so I could always make sure that I'd get both games in. And let me tell you what, running 2 sessions a day for a week straight, that is both physically and mentally taxing, but it was a blast, and it's certainly not something I'm going to do right this second, but I will be doing sometime in the future because of how chaotic and crazy and just how fun it is. Now, in regards of running all of these one-shots in that week, of course, I had to do a lot of reading. I had to do a lot of prep, so after these sessions, I would immediately go ahead and read, and I'd be reading all the way at night, and then I'd be reading right when I wake up, and make sure that I always have everything prepared. And that is a major strength of this book, is the fact that, yeah, I did do some prep for all of these adventures, but sometimes I couldn't catch up. But the thing is you don't need to have these things fully prepped out. You don't need to have read every single word. You don't have to have every room memorized. For many of these one-shots, you can, in fact, run them just as you're reading the text and just flipping pages and reading right there on the spot. And it works, so long as you just know where the destination is heading. So props to this book, the fact that you are able to run it like that, very smooth, because I know for a fact that there is a lot of modules that have been written where you cannot run a certain area if you haven't read the thing multiple times because of an intricate detail or how a trap works or how an encounter works. You don't find that in this book. You can definitely run it as is. Of course, you can easily expand upon any of these adventures, any of these encounters, and make it much more unique. You can make it definitely tied into your own campaign, but for the instances of a one-shot, it fits so well. There really isn't that much prep time needed, which is what I want. Sometimes I want to run a one-shot, and I kind of want to turn my brain off a little as the DM. Unfortunately, we have this burden to bear as DMs that we have to do all this work, but I say screw that. Sometimes you just want to play the game, and reading out of this book is a great way to play the game. So for this next bit, I'm just going to go over all the individual adventures and show off some of the highlights, so maybe you can go ahead and prepare yourself for that. So for 2 things from Joy of Extradimensional Spaces, as soon as my players walked into there, then immediately Matrius makes his way past the party, says, "Screw you all, I'm out of here, you're on your own." And as soon as he makes his way through the portal begins to close, the party has no chance of making their way through there, and then they hear Matrius scream out in pain once he gets out. And 2, very important, is the fact that my players, they searched around, they found all these books, and they believed that they had to grab all the books physically. But the good thing is once they had all the books, they realized that they were clearly missing some letter. And that is when I said, okay, go ahead and just roll me an investigation check. And I had them search the entire place. And then they found that secret door that leads down to the cellar, and of course gets them that final letter to go ahead and say whatever it is they need out loud. For Mazfroth's Mighty Digressions, my party got a little aggressive in the wide, and in fact actually some people got arrested. So that was part of the adventure, that they had to take days and days off because some people got arrested because they were being a little too loud for public space. And also very important, when they finally did tail all the Jackal-wearers back to their hideout, they went inside and they went swords blazing, and I just had all of the Jackal-wearers just immediately try and put everyone to sleep. And of course, 2 people fell asleep right away, and then that 3rd person got rugged of smothering, and the Jackal-wearer said, "Hey, surrender or we're just gonna kill you." And thankfully they surrendered. For Book of the Raven, I split this up into a perfect 3-pillar campaign. First off, they had the exploration of the Scooby-Doo-like house, going around, hearing some weird noises, and just genuinely being scared. The second part being the roleplay, where they encounter the were-ravens in human form and talk for a bit, and then the were-ravens reveal themselves. And then the third part, where the party goes to the Shadowfell to go ahead and retrieve an item for the were-ravens to try and get inducted into the Scarlet Sash. And unfortunately, my party got wiped. But me being the most generous DM that I am, I did have the party somewhat come back to life through Shadowfell magic. And hey, with that, who knows what the Shadowfell did to them when they got resurrected. For Deep and Creeping Darkness, my players made their way all the way to the town, explored around a bit, of course heard some spooky stuff, but they just trucked on and eventually made their way to the caves. I did not show them this map of the caves until combat occurred, and mind you, the combat only occurred in the room full of dynamite. The reason I didn't show them the map is because I wanted them to feel like they're lost, that they're keep on going to random portions of this cave. But the thing is, they got smart. They said, hey, okay, you know, this place is huge. Let's go ahead and leave magical markers all around to make sure that we can always make our way out. Which was smart, because I had all the mean logs light the dynamite. They're blowing up all around, and I told them, hey, you feel like this mine's about to collapse. And guess what? Because they marked their way back, they were able to run through no problem. So kudos to them. For Shemshime's bedtime rhyme, I started off with them just going down there, and then of course they wake up and I said, hey, day number 1 quarantine. This drove them insane because presumably they've been driven insane by the real quarantine. So they immediately just started going crazy. And this was really bad because even on day 1 of quarantine, before I had anything major go down, they immediately just started just messing up the place. And also, very importantly, is one of the players dropped that stone statue and caused it to collapse and break. And unfortunately for them, they were out of weapon to be used against Shemshime at the very finale, which was unfortunate. And because of that, they did not have a way to defeat Shemshime because they didn't think of anything else. And Shemshime wiped them all out. Pretty sad. For Price of Beauty, my players had a spa day. They went around and they had a delightful time. Not the beginning part, because right as soon as they showed up in the morning, they had to do a morning workout with that hag over there. And unfortunately, they got beat up. Almost everybody got beat up, except for one person. Actually succeeded on everything and got that strength potion, which was pretty cool. But afterward, they got a mani-pedi, they got to spend time in the spring, they got massages. It was a grand old time. And then eventually, once they discovered that scary things were going on here, they went to go confront the hags, and unfortunately a combat ensued. They were able to kill one of the hags, however, 2 of the PCs went down, and then the hag said, hey, surrender or else we're just going to kill someone. And the PCs surrendered. So yes, 1 hag was defeated and thus the coven destroyed, but the PCs submitted, and basically the epilogue was that they were forced to work here alongside all the other people, which I thought was pretty funny. For Book of Cylinders, my players showed up to the Gripply village, talked to the Gripply, and said, hey, we need to get to the bottom of this. And they scouted around real quick using a combination of their familiars or whatever else. And they just decided, hey, obviously the UNT are doing something down there. Let's go ahead and skip the village. So my players just immediately went in the river, went all the way up the river to the old village there, to that temple, and decided to beat the UNT there. And it made sense that when they destroyed the UNT abomination there, that all the other UNT would run away, because if their boss gets killed, you know, why the heck would they stick around? So it was a pretty short and quick experience. Sadly, no mystery, but they were able to kill the bad guys and save the day. For Sarah of Yellowcrest Manor, my players spent a decent amount of time doing the investigation all the way in Waterdeep, talking to some people, you know, chatting the place up. In fact, the players spent a decent amount of time in that manor that used to be owned by Yellowcrest, and they were talking to the butler the whole time. The butler was just chatting up with them, and it was a fun little roleplay scenario. Eventually, my players made their way to the cult's hideout here, and it was a fun dynamic encounter because there was cultists in Grell, and they were going ahead duking it out while Yellowcrest himself was going ahead and enacting this ritual. More Grell spawned out. pretty fun, and the party was not able to defeat him. No one had counterspell on them, which is unfortunate because if they had explored around just a little bit more, they could have found the spell scroll of counterspell, which I would have ruled as being able to counterspell the teleportation. So the interesting thing is, as written, a spell scroll says that it takes an action to read. Me personally, I would just go ahead and rule that a spell scroll of counterspell, you could use those as a reaction. With Lore of Lurue, the players found themselves in a fairy tale story, and it's funny, they immediately tried finding a way out of here, and I just had to say, okay, you fly 20 feet up with your familiar, and he hits an invisible wall, and he flies out 20 feet in any direction beyond the forest, and it's an invisible wall. You find yourself pretty much on a railroad, which I thought was cute. I know some people don't appreciate that super duper railroady style, but hey, we're playing one shot, so that's kind of what we're here for. We're here to play the adventure. So they knew that they were in a story of sorts. They interacted with all of the NPCs perfectly fine. They even saved the Dryads from the hag, and they were rewarded with some potions, which was nice. And then they get to that awesome combat at the end, and that corrupted avatar of Lurue was destroying those werewolves. It was awesome. And then the players go in and go ahead and put a stop to it, and it was epic. They were laying the smackdown on it, and then the corrupted avatar of Lurue was defeated, and thus some goodness came back into this book, and then they were shunned out, and they got that awesome reward. With Kandlekeep Dekonstruktion, the players immediately found out that something was going on at the barn door. They make their way over here, and then they see that there are some janitors that are mopping up the place, and they just barge right in. The cultists immediately start hitting them with the brooms, and it's funny, one of the PCs actually was like, I don't care if he's hitting me with the broom, I'm just going to continue on. I'm like, okay. And eventually they start knocking out all these cultists one by one, which was very nice, I will say. The PCs were not killing the cultists at all, which was very good. And they eventually make their way up the tower, then they go down the tower, and then I just said, hey, 1 hour into the session, the rocket goes off, and the rocket goes with them, and it's awesome. The players are just immediately flying up and going, and the leader of the cult says, yeah, you're free to go, you can jump out the door if you want. And the party did. The party just said, yeah, we're not going to space, screw that. And they all jumped out. And with a combination of gaseous form and animating objects and whatever else, they were able to make their way back down without too much issue. In Zikran, Zephyrean Tome, the party starts to roleplay it up with that djinn, and they're having a great time. They talk to the dragon, have a great time there. And then eventually the party makes their way to this castle and make sure that they don't get into any fights with any of the ghosts. They make their way down here and they confront Zikran, and it's a fun time. In fact, actually, one of the players had a trident of fish command, so I just said that the water elemental had some fish in it, and the player was clever enough to say, hey, I command the fish to disrupt the water elemental. And that was, just a nice little dynamic way to change up the encounter. And also very important is Zikran had that cannon, but it specifically states that Zikran pushes a button on that initiative order to go ahead and shoot the cannon. But we had a monk in the party, and the monk stunned Zikran, and thus the cannon stopped shooting after a single turn. The players beat up Zikran, forced him to relinquish the djinn, and of course the party decides to waste their wish, as the fisherman of the party asked, I wish for a bigger fish stick. And of course, the wish was granted, and now there is a genie that was free. In the curious tale of Wysteria Vale, the players once again just got told, hey, you gotta stab a guy, but it's not what it seems. They eventually make their way into this delightful little town, and they interact with a decent amount of people in the community. They don't actually find out that they are fake, which is funny. They're just interacting with them, and they never passed any inside checks or whatever, and they eventually make their way to this place. They were extremely curious, though. They were not going to wait for the party at night, so they went ahead and snuck inside, and then there they found the bard that they were looking for. They make their way in through all the paintings. The beholder gets into a fight with them, and it's just a grand old time. It's actually really sad. They tried stabbing him in the middle of the fight when he got close to the beholder, but the person rolled double ones when they had advantage on the attack to hit Aaron Quill. It was pretty sad, honestly. So, unfortunately, they had to kill the beholder, but thankfully they do so without any issue, and then eventually they talk him into it and stab him, and thus they are freed. With the Book of Inner Alchemy, this was just a classic kung fu movie. The party makes their way up in there, and then they fight Steel Crane, and eventually they make their way further in, and then they fight both Jade Tigress and Bok Mei at the same time. It was honestly a pretty scary encounter. People were getting knocked prone, knocked out, stunned, and whatever else during the fight, and it was pretty cool. It came down to the wire, honestly, but the party was able to beat Bok Mei into submission, and it was actually really fun. At the end, they got those ingredients to make the gloves of soul catching, but the party was completely split on what to do with it. Some people wanted to destroy them, some people wanted to create them, some people wanted to return them to Candlekeep, but of course, this being a one-shot, I said, hey, we fade to black, and who knows what happens next time. With the Canopic Being, I made sure to get my players into this place as soon as possible so they could start exploring around. And something I added was basically just made the place feel a lot more alien, a lot more strange, as I basically said that the walls looked like space, and as they're making their way through here, they're not walking, they're floating. Just to give it that, space alien-like feel. But of course, there's a whole bunch of eyeballs staring at them. So they explore around a bit, and eventually they make their way here, and they get into a big old fight with the Mummy Lord herself, and it's a grand time because there's a huge amount of banter. I love when the villains get to banter with the party, and the party banters back, and because there was just a lot of commotion and craziness going on. That Mummy Lord hit extremely hard, and one more hit definitely would have knocked down and potentially killed a PC. But they were pretty lucky and able to do a bunch of damage, specifically that paladin. Oh my goodness, smites on undead, oh, disastrous, especially when they get a crit, disgusting. They were able to kill her and get the heck out of there, and made sure that their organs weren't on any donor list. In Scrivener's Tale, my players investigate for a decent amount of time, eventually following all the trail, and eventually make their way here. Exploring around a bit, they eventually go inside and eventually summon forth the Fey Princess. And it's really unfortunate because during that entire investigation, they were getting more and more worn down. And then unfortunately, someone hits that 5th level of that tracker and explodes into a shower of glass right there in combat. But with one-shots, I always have backups prepared. So I killed the PC, and then I just immediately handed him another character sheet, and I said, and your cousin shows up out of nowhere, what do you do? And it was actually a pretty close fight as the fighting continued, even though they just got a random new person that showed up to the fight. It was still extremely close. In fact, I think one more round and almost everybody would have been dead. That would have been pretty crazy. But hey, good tactics, a lot of DPS, and them sacrificing themselves for the greater good. They were able to beat the Fey Queen back and get the heck out of there. In Alkazaar's Appendix, my players explore around the desert for quite some time. And it's really funny, as they explore around the desert, I had them encounter some various things, including that Sphinx that puts out that riddle. And I went ahead and said, hey, there is a cave, and there's some tiny little creatures at the mouth of the cave. What do you wish to do? And the players were sort of scared about interacting with them, so they didn't bother. So they didn't get to interact with the dragon turtle, which could have helped out later on. And mind you, that could have been a really big help, because eventually when they go to the temple, they get in that fight with that Draco Lich, and that fight came down to the wire. Something to note, when that Draco Lich fought, I got the lightning breath back every single turn I rolled for it. Every turn I was rolling a 5 or a 6 on a d6, and it was destroying the party. The only reason the party did not wipe there is because of an extremely well-placed wall of stone that prevented the Draco Lich from seeing, and of course made sure that the layer action didn't work either, because the layer action requires that the Draco Lich can see the target. So incredibly clutch there. The party beats the Draco Lich into submission, and they actually have a Draco Lich as an enemy now because they couldn't kill it outright. The Draco Lich's soul is somewhere in its phylactery. The party makes their way down there, and I kept on hinting, hey, Nether Scrolls are powerful, Nether Scrolls are awesome. That could make you incredibly powerful, but the party said, nah, we're going to send this prince off. And the prince and the golem went to the fields beyond, and they were good people in the end. And last but certainly not least, we have Xanthoria. The party shows up, makes friends with Thunderwing, and Thunderwing saying, you guys are my best friends ever, this is great. The party explores around, and there they get into a fight with a Death Knight and a Death Tyrant at the same time. This was a destructive fight, and I do mean destructive. That Death Knight was doing destructive wave, and it was awesome. The party was getting beat down. They were getting hit left, right, and center. And I remember, the sadness that took place when one of my players said, and I'm going to use my action to cast Cure Wounds. And I said, yeah, go ahead and roll it. And then they rolled really good. And I say, as you try to heal yourself, nothing happens. You're in a death cone. And it was just utter destruction after that. The Beholder was able to just destroy everybody. One PC bled out on the ground, one PC got disintegrated, one PC got petrified, and the last PC, a monk, was able to hobble away, but not before killing the Death Knight. Literally a dart killed a Death Knight. It was so pathetic. The monk was able to run away, but I said, yeah, you were able to warn other adventurers, and then he succumbed to the plague. So in essence, it essentially was a TPK. So what are my overall thoughts after running all these adventures? I am left wanting more, and that is a good thing. Now that I've ran all these adventures, I see all the details there that are waiting to be fleshed out. I of course see that these things can be beautifully ran as one-shots, and that's great. But the thing is some people run one-shots differently. Some people want to run a 4, 5, 6 hour long one-shot, and it's going to be full and grand, you know, multiple combats. And some people only want to run, you know, an hour and a half or 2 long one-shot, in which case you got to dial back on the combat, in which case you got to speed things up a bit. And either way, these adventures allow you to do that. But more importantly is the fact that I want to see these things added to a full-blown campaign. And I want to see these things as a campaign itself, just running it all in the book, or adding these to a pre-existing adventure you already have. I want to see all of that, and I know I'm going to do that, because there are themes here that are just absolutely phenomenal. There are NPCs that I want my players to get to know and love. There are locations I want my players to explore around. There is so much that I want to see and do with this book. So I am so very glad and thankful that I was able to get to run all these adventures and go ahead and explore that all with so many different people. This book is absolutely worth it in my mind. I had an absolute blast with it, and I know players are going to have a blast with it, and I know you're going to have a blast with it. Whether you run one-shots, mini campaigns, long campaigns, whatever it is, this book allows you to go ahead and fit that to your own desires. And something I strongly recommend is you read this, and you can go ahead and figure out what makes a one-shot, in which case you can go ahead and start crafting your own adventures under this same guise and principle. The idea of having dungeons with only X amount of rooms, only going up against X number of enemies, etc., etc. The design philosophy here is amazing. So thank you to all of those players who allowed me that privilege to run all these adventures. It was an absolute blast. Candle Week was an absolute success. Thank you all so very much. It was incredibly awesome. You know, all the ups, all the downs. It was great. I can't believe it. I can't believe that I got to run all those adventures for all those people. So freaking awesome. Thank you all. So yes, I have used the contents in that book, but I am going to use that book again and again and again. I promise you. I'm going to be using it for multiple campaigns. Whatever the case may be, I'm going to be using this book more. So go ahead and tell me, do you plan on running these all as one-shots for your particular group? Are you going to make these elongated and make them mini-shots? Are you going to run them as a partial campaign? Are you going to run them part of a full campaign? Are you going to add individual ones to a pre-existing campaign? Go ahead and tell me all of those things because I want to know. But that is going to do it for me. Thank you so much for watching. And thank you to all my amazing patrons up here. You guys are absolutely incredible. Thank you so very much. That is going to do it for me. Thank you so much for listening. And I cannot wait to see you all in the next one.